Hello flatties and globe defenders, here I am at Cape Byron. There's apparently no curvature to be found at Byron Bay, but of course flatties don't know how to look for it. In previous videos we looked at some landmarks from various heights showing obvious evidence of curvature, received significant objections from flatties of course, but they've yet to come up with some mathematics to counter these observations. It's just things inside their head and made up science. Sorry flatties, this is curvature. The location that we're at next is the mouth of the Brunswick River at Brunswick Heads, and you can get a view from the top of the rock wall and from the beach, and we measured distance to points of interest. So there's 6.65 miles there to Julian Rocks, and depending on your height, for looking at that, there will be some amount hidden, and then 8.28 miles or 13 kilometers to Cape Byron, and to Hastings Point, which will go view up there, is about 12 miles and 20 kilometers. So we'll start looking at the photos. So here's that lifesavers tent that featured earlier on in a video, and so this is a frame from that video. So you can see the top of the tent, and you can see there the top of the tent how much water there would have to be on the beach to obscure that tent. So that's the amount of tent obscured by the curve. So there's a longer shot down the beach with the lifesavers tent in there, and down on the sand there where the waves are breaking on the sand, I set up my camera a little bit later on down there, just above the water line. So the approximate height of camera above water is about 6 feet, and so this picture is taken from the top of the rock wall. Now I'm going to make some comparisons now between those two locations, the higher location and the lower location. So this is Julian Rocks from on top of the rock wall, and while I think that the water is starting to rise above Julian Rocks there, it's very hard to tell, so we'll call this one just on the horizon from that height. But when we go down on the beach and take a look, there's actually Julian Rocks is starting to sink behind the horizon from that height. So there's Julian Rocks over the horizon, over the curve. And this is Cape Byron from higher up. This is a picture taken from a location that's not at Brunswick Heads, it's closer. And this is from the top of the rocks at Brunswick Heads. You can see that the beach is missing, and there's a very good clear shot with no miraging or inferior mirage, no mirror layer. And down at the beach you can see the horizon is higher, so there is less of Cape Byron visible. So compare that with that, and this is looking over to the lighthouse. You cannot see the beach there anymore. Moving across, so there's a distinctive building there, or several buildings, and I'm going to, you can see that you can just see a little bit of the beach there. And now we have a Google Maps. So there's that building that we're looking at, and you can see how much beach there is. From this point here, you can see how high that we are above the water. There's the street with that house. But there's a very interesting thing from this Google Maps view. Now you'll notice before when I panned around, the beach started to disappear. Well, if you look at this Google Maps and this scene from there, you'll notice that the beach gets thinner and disappears over the curve, and Hastings Point has disappeared over the curve, even on Google Maps. And you can see how high this is taken from. The waves are way down here, so it's a good sight over the waves. And you know, about the excuses about the waves obscuring something, that's complete bollocks here. But I just thought that that was very interesting with curvature being found on Google Maps. And here's from down below, and there's the same building, and the water is much higher. So I'm going to say obvious curvature. I know the flatties object to this, but let's run through some of the excuses in a minute. But here's a picture, a frame grab from a video I've done from down below, and I don't know why I love this picture, but it's very similar to that, but this one seems to be more crisp. So flat brain excuses, and let's play pick an excuse, because the excuses are never consistent. They'll just make up an excuse to suit the occasion. There is no science behind the excuses. This just seems to fit whatever happens on the day. Now, the most important and popular excuse that we see is, oh, what's missing must be hiding behind the mirror layer. And clearly, in this picture, there is no mirror layer to hide behind. So what does a flattie do now? You know, but they're not stumped. It's okay. That excuse not going to work. Now we can move on to the next excuse. And the next excuse, I've heard this one, is there's a limit of sight, and also known as an obscurity point, similar sort of thing. Okay, so it's been said by some flatties that the limit of sight seems to coincide with your horizon, and that's why you can't see anything over the horizon, which is, I have to point this out. So if this limit of sight here was 3 miles away, how come you can see Cape Byron, which is, what, 8 miles away or something? So if everything is supposed to be obscured past 3 miles, I don't know, I'm looking at that, I cannot see anything obscured there. I mean, there's plenty visible. So, oops. Oh, that excuse is not going to work. Notice how all these excuses are sort of like inconsistent with one another. But anyway, let's go on to the next one. Oh yes, perspective. Oh yes, the bottom is hidden because of perspective. So as things get further away, they start to look smaller because of the change in angular size. So I still can never, ever work this one out in a logical manner, how the beach is changed in angular size, but say that house isn't. Now, I've yet to have a flattie explain that to me properly, but they'll just say, oh, you don't get it. You don't get it. I can't help it if you don't understand. Yeah, right, okay. And then we've got this one, height perspective, that Ross made up in his mind. And you know how you go up in height and you can see further? Well, that's obviously height perspective. I'm not really sure how height perspective works, and Ross certainly can't do a sight diagram to demonstrate it, but there's a funny thing about height perspective, you know. For starters, it is that quite amusing to Ross that the globe calculations are all based on the very same limits of perspective across a flat plane. Now, I've never seen any calculations for how Ross or anyone else arrived at this limit of perspective across a flat plane. And Ross has the gall to say, what an amazing coincidence that it matches the globe calculations exactly. Could it be that it's not a globe? And that's exactly what we see it to be. As the higher we get, the more we see. And I'm thinking, well, is something he made up in his head? He has no no derivation formula. And isn't it interesting how it so conveniently matches, coincides exactly with the surface of a sphere of 6,371 kilometers in radius? Now, what an amazing coincidence that is. And, I mean, I'm just going to do a cuckoo on that one. Right, so the next one, well, obscurity point is similar to limit of sight. There may be a difference, but the difference exists in Ross's brain, and I'm not sure he can get it out correctly. But as I said, if that's an obscurity point, then how come it matches there the exact point where the horizon is on a globe, a sphere of 6,371 kilometer radius? Coincidental, isn't it? And then Flat Earth Perth, not only does he come up with the limit of sight and perspective, but he loves this choppy swell and line of sight argument. Now, it is definitely interesting. So yes, of course, you can see further the higher you go. And flatties twist this into something different. And the reason why you can see further is simple geometry. But it's now made up because of, okay, so because of perspective, a choppy swell will, because you're looking across, I still haven't quite worked this out, but how this is exactly supposed to work, I'm just quoting the words here. So the theory apparently is the choppy swell there, it's now blocking your view of the beach. And perspective means that the closer chop here is very big compared to the beach over there. And on the surface, this may sound plausible, but I'm going to make a few observations here that make this a lot of bunkum. For starters, you can see very easily the size of the chop, especially as it gets close to there. And you can very easily see that the size of that chop does not cover the relative size, even allowing for perspective, the size of the beach that's obscured. Now, if we go back to this beach, you can see, look at the size of the chop in this picture compared with the amount of land that was obscured in the other picture. Now, it's like the size difference is enormous. It's impossible for the chop to obscure that much, because this is the same distance away. This is the same angular size reduction due to perspective. Now, here's the other thing that it's a dead giveaway if you got the observation skills that the Earth is curved. You can see on this picture, which is from higher up, you can see further on the water because the chop gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's easy to see even with your naked eye here looking at this photo. And when you look at a photo like this where the horizon is closer, you can see that the size of the chop does not get as small as in the other one. So chop gets really, really small, so easy to see when you're looking for it. And then chop, you can see it's a really clear visual indication that the horizon is closer. And look how much is hidden. Impossible to be hidden by the chop. So, flatties, there's all the known excuses. I think the best, I have to laugh so much that there's no inferior mirage, because Flat Earth Perth loves that. Everything's hidden behind the inferior mirage. Ranty loves that. And they think that this inferior mirage anyway is some kind of mid-air hologram. They have no idea of the science behind the inferior mirage. So they can just make it up and say it obscures the bottoms of things. But anyway, that's for another video. So, seeing as Flat Earth Perth can't use the inferior mirage excuse, he's gone on to moved on to one of the other excuses. Good work, mate. Now, sorry, I'll do some more pictures. Sorry, that's a bit blurry, but there's some pine trees at Byron Bay, and from down on the beach, there's beach missing. Here's another snapshot from a video from up on the rocks, and there's the picture from down on the beach. So consistent, very consistent in mount obscured. And again, look at the chop, take note of the chop. You can see further there, it's clearly got a close by horizon there. And so from this rock wall, you can see the height of it there. We look north, and there's Hastings Point is there to the right, and we'll get a closer look at that in a minute. And there's some pine trees there which look recognizable, and that's you can see how far above the water that those pine trees are, and this is how they've been obscured from another location I viewed in one of the earlier videos. And finally, for this location we can finally see Hastings Point. Now, not all of it. The car park in Hastings Point is visible, and a really interesting thing here, there's partial mirroring, partial obscuring there in the mirror layer. Now there doesn't appear to be a mirror layer to the left, but there seems to be some mirroring on this part to the right, which is a very interesting observation. You can tell the difference normally between what's an inferior mirage and what's not, because you see these little flecks on top of the water. which is usually an indication of an inferior mirage, because the top, the horizon is not that clear. Like it's much clearer to the left there. So I think that's it for this location. Okay, so we had these questions before about will Hastings Point rise from the ocean, and it appears yes, that's definitely happening. And will Julian Rock sink into the sea? Well, that's definitely happening too. So we do have a little bit more coming up, and I think I'll have to postpone it to another video. And here's some teasers for what might be coming in the future. Julian Rocks, Hastings Point, Cape Byron, and goodness me, a sinking ship. Well, thanks for watching, and please join me for the next exciting episode of the curvature found in Byron Bay.